Greetings. I have a lot of videos about how this hyperinflation narrative is completely bogus and none of the data supports it, and how my atom thesis proves, and now with many years of data behind it, of how a certain amount of money printing not only does not cause inflation, it is necessary to halt deflation, and that amount is growing exponentially because the diffusion of technology and therefore deflation into the economy is also growing exponentially. But I'm going to have a lot of fun in debunking all these inflation scaremongers because some of them are just so bad at math and contradict themselves so much that this is going to be entertaining. Now, like-minded viewers may find some of this to be repetitive. At the same time, there's new subscribers and everyone is searching for inflation-related information all the time. And we're going to debunk this in another way, especially when all types of supposed quote-unquote experts are emerging out of the woodwork with no real history or credentials behind them for what makes them an expert, and demonstrating how bad they are at even a high school level of mathematics, as I will prove in this video. So now we go to this clip.
Are back with Frank Holmes, Executive Chairman of Hive Blockchain Technologies and CEO and CIO of US Global Investors. All right, Frank, you straddle the world of crypto and precious metals, and both are seeing interest on concerns of money printing, dollar devaluation, and inflation. Now, gold has been advancing slowly, breached 1900 this week, and CME futures are showing more inflow into gold. But do you think that the reason gold is not really rallying as much as you'd expect is because we may not be getting an accurate reading of inflation from official data? Because it does seem as though inflation is here and a lot higher across the board, and it doesn't really seem like that is being indicated by the CPI data, for example.
I've been writing about this for over a year, that inflation is extremely understated. And I even have a little video to explain why. The CPI excludes energy and food. And if you just look at those costs, also the transportation costs and logistics because of COVID.
Okay, let me stop right there. The CPI does not exclude energy and food. And not only that, the more comprehensive metric that I like, that I feature in many videos, is the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index, which does include energy and food. And guess what? That index is actually indicating deflation, but I'll come to that later.
And tariffs that we've had to deal with, it's warped the world. It's going to take another couple of years before this really settles down. So we're going to see, and if you had real inflation numbers like the old CPI number that used to be the stable number, inflation's running at 12% according to our numbers. So I think that...
Okay, now how bad at math does someone have to be to say inflation is running at 12%? The CPI has been growing at about 2% a year for the last 10 years. And even over the last 3 years, it is roughly in that same band as I will show you in this video itself. 12%, that means it doubles every 6 years under the rule of 72, which I explained in this card over here. 12% a year inflation, that means doubling in 6 years, quadrupling in 12 years, and being up 1000x in 60 years. That's obviously not the case. People like this actually consider stock market returns to be inflation. And I suspect that's what this individual, Frank Holmes, who I'd never heard about before, so he's obviously not someone who is a very high profile in this space, but they tend to believe that equity gains are actually inflation. I don't know if that's what he in fact believes, but a lot of people who say that inflation has been running at double digits year after year for the last several years or even decades tend to also think a stock market rise is inflation, and they have no vision under which wealth is in fact created. How is wealth created at all, according to them? By their definition of stock market gains being inflation, then if an entrepreneur starts a tech company and becomes a billionaire, that is a terrible thing for that entrepreneur, because by this logic, that entrepreneur suffered a tremendous amount of personal hyperinflation, according to their logic. That sounds funny, but that is how lopsided and inverted the logic of these types of statements are. So we continue.
10-year government bond, if you can borrow cheap, buy it. I think that inflation is massively understated, and it's going to slowly, like gold, come out. Gold's going to get its reset button. I stick to my number. In 3 years, it'll be $4,000.
Gold at $4,000 in 3 years' time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you know, the Fed is very much still trying to downplay these inflation concerns. We had The Fed Vice Chair is saying this week that the Fed will be able to curb an outbreak of inflation and engineer a soft landing. Do you think that's likely?
Well, they're always going to try to talk it down. The thawing of COVID hasn't really stopped. Europe is just trying to unravel.
Okay, so let's examine these claims about inflation with actual CPI data because, as we know from recent videos I've put out, this narrative is in full flow, and inflation sells. Inflation is how a lot of speculators in gold get suckers to buy gold so they can dump on it, and also crypto. And why people think crypto is a hedge to inflation, even if there were inflation, I do not know. During the existence of Bitcoin, the US CPI rate has been 1.8% inflation a year over the entire 11 years, whatever, of Bitcoin's existence. But let me show you how to calculate this yourself, and this requires a high school level of mathematical aptitude, so I'm not going to oversimplify it down to a level lower than that. I'm just going to show you these calculations on a scientific calculator. This is the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, bls.gov, and to check the CPI, Consumer Price Index, which Frank Holmes talked about, click on this graph icon over here. And for more formatting options, go over here and choose the following: original data value and 12-month percentage change, so annual percentage change in CPI, and press retrieve data. This is the CPI and how it has risen over the last 10 years. Now, people are using even this chart to scare other people without looking at what the vertical axis is. If the vertical axis only starts at 220, then a rise from 220 to 270 is not a lot. But now it looks like, oh, it's a out of control spiral. So they're preying on people who are bad at math. Now, if someone's bad at math to this extent, that's kind of their own fault too, but we'll talk about that in another video. So if we want to take a 10-year calculation, this is what we do. The CPI's most recent reading, June of 2021, was about 271, and 10 years prior, July of 2011, is about 225, and we round off the decimals. So here's the mathematics of calculating the 10-year rate of annual change, or the compound annual growth rate of the CPI over this period. So we take 271, which is the number over here, and divide it by this number over here, 225, and you get this 1.204, meaning 20.4% inflation, and then you take a root of that, 1/10 root, because it's 10 years, so 0.1. Dividing this into 10 different blocks to see what the annual rate of average growth is how you get to annual inflation rate as measured by the CPI for 10 years. And you get this number, 1.0187, meaning the inflation rate over this 10-year period has been 1.87. That's actually a little bit below the ideal target. I say the ideal target should be between 2 and 3%, perhaps closer to 3%, because inflation fuels more technological innovation because technology consumes that inflation. But the last 10 years has been 1.87% in the CPI. And remember, this is starting from July of 2011, so it's not including the real estate bust of 08-09. This is entirely in the age of QE. Money printing was well underway as of July 2011. And the 10-year inflation rate as measured by the CPI is 1.87%. Now, if you're interested in the 3-year inflation rate, because that is the more current money printing, you do the same exercise. You take 271 divided by the number from 3 years prior, which is 251. So 271 divided by 251 shows how much aggregate inflation there was in 3 years, 1.079. So 7.9% over 3 years, almost 8%. But to see how much that is per year, you take x to the y power of that and divide it by 3 years, 0.333, because 1 divided by 3 is 0.333. You get to 1.0258. So 2.58% inflation over the last 3 years. It's a little bit higher than the 10-year number, but still very well within the normal zone and very close to what I would say is the optimal number. So 2.58% inflation despite this little blip upwards that you see here. See, people are screaming about this upward jump over here, but what about the big negative over here? They were never talking about that. They should have been worried about deflation, because deflation is more catastrophic than even inflation levels significantly higher than what we're seeing now. Or over here, there was deflation over here, and you didn't see all that news about deflation back in 2015 or anything either. So people are very disingenuous, and part of it is because the inflation narrative sells. If you go down to the annual percentage number and just visualize what we have seen, so from July of 2011 to present, This is the average annual growth rate. If you took a trend line of this average annual growth rate, you'd get that 1.87% number that we saw before. Yes, this current up spike is what's scaring people, but it's already been offset by this down spike. These are all just oscillations from the mean. And over the last 3 years, it's that 2.58 number, which is a little bit higher, but not by much, and is in fact closer to what I consider the optimal number. So that is what the CPI inflation situation actually is. And for someone to say that it's 12% a year, and that too over a multi-year period, that is just so incredibly wrong that it's rather surprising that he could be an asset manager. I wonder what his investment returns are over a long period of time. But as we know, if you've been watching this channel, the best metric is an international metric and a metric that cannot be rigged, which is the commodity index. The commodity index includes gold, oil, natural gas, silver, and many food items such as corn, wheat, soybeans, pork bellies, etc., etc., etc. So we'll go to the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index. So this is the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index, GSCI, as portrayed on their official S&P Global website. And we take the 10-year window, which you see highlighted in red. So the annual rate of change has been minus 2.69%, negative deflation. For the last 10 years, commodities have been net falling, as I speak about in many other videos as well. So for people to talk about hyperinflation, that is absurd. Over a 10-year window, which I believe is an ideal macroeconomic window, that smooths out all the blips that people want to hype up in the media or overemphasize, minus 2.69%. So while the CPI was plus 1.87%, as we saw a few minutes ago, commodities were minus 2.69%. And while the 3-year inflation rate was 2.58%, the 3-year commodity number plus 5.43. Okay, that's a little bit high, but I say 3 years is not a complete window in terms of commodity cycles. So 10 years is minus 2.69%. Plus that commodity growth rate of 5.43 has pushed oil and gold to levels where technology comes in and increases supply greatly, as we talk about in a lot of videos, and anyone who has read my atom thesis can figure out. So this is how low inflation actually is after how much? $30 trillion of money printing that has been done over the last 11 years, and about $400 billion a month ongoing as we speak. Just a couple of days ago, I did a video about how Q2 of 2021 had 1.1 trillion of money printing, and yet you can only get these very weak rises in commodity prices. Very weak. So don't buy into this hyperinflation narrative. Let me know when the CPI is above 4% growth rate for an entire year. And let's see what the amount of money printing is at that time, and then we'll see if there's any chance of hyperinflation. Otherwise, no. The bigger threat is deflation, because if central banks were to stop printing money, there would be outright deflation. And everyone with any debt, especially a mortgage, would be in very, very deep trouble. So remember, money printing is your friend. And money printing does not cause any aberrant high inflation. It merely sustains the optimal amount of inflation, which is between 2 and 3% a year, as we saw. So I hope this content enabled some people to figure out where to check the actual data and what type of narratives to completely tune out, because those narratives are not only entirely wrong, but if someone is actually saying that, either they are very bad at math or they're on the other side of a pump and dump scheme. And I don't know if that's the case with Mr. Holmes or anything. I'm not going to speculate about that. But those are the two reasons someone would actually say something like that. If they really believe it, they're bad at math. If they are on the other side of a pump and dump scheme, they're trying to get people to buy something that they intend to sell. Therefore, they utter the opposite of what they believe. But I have no idea if he is doing that or not, so I'm not accusing him of anything. That's just something that tends to happen in the market, and the small investors end up holding the bag. Now, if you like this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, and thank you very much for watching.